The failure of the Star Wars sequels as stories is a familiar pattern, and it goes well beyond filmmaking. It's an automatic rule. When your values are messed up, your actions, in consideration of those values, makes a mess. It's not that race and gender aren't important. They're contextually important. That is, they can be. And you can write compelling stories about that, if you want to. But Star Wars, as created by George Lucas, was about more than that. And speaking clearly, I believe that some people simply couldn't see beyond their own insecurity to empathize with a white male lead. Some believed, mistakenly, that this was the problem with Star Wars, and they spent more energy addressing that than getting to the real hard work of world building, or in this case, world extending. Because Star Wars was about something far greater than demographics, attempts to reboot it, while connecting it to the originals, and with increased consideration to social themes, was necessarily reductive, and it made the expanded Star Wars universe actually smaller in terms of the things that matter on the deepest level. Star Wars, as presented, was not about the white power structure. It was about power, full stop. The fact that some people couldn't recognize its universality in a story that was well fleshed out, that's a play on words, is not an indictment on the original films, filmmakers, or fans. It's actually an indictment on its accusers and would-be storyrunners who, funnily enough, erroneously attempted to right the wrongs of their own cinematic father. But we can take race, gender, and politics out of this discussion entirely and look strictly at how the sequels progressed film to film to demonstrate the chaos that they are. The sequels, narratively speaking, don't even get along with themselves. F*** you, Dale! F*** you! Revisiting them is like walking into a crime scene. Clearly, something went wrong. And that something was planning. The excuse that there wasn't sufficient time to write all 3 films is a non-starter. Because while the sequels are 3 films, there's supposed to be one story. And that story should have been conceptualized before it was released. Unless you're a god-tier creative genius who can deliver a 9th-inning home run that somehow manages to neatly tie everything together, you simply don't operate this way. These are supposed to be pre-connected, dramatic, long-form narratives, not some cobbled, unfocused, isolated chapters we'd expect from a TV sitcom. Star Wars is a plane that you don't build mid-flight. At the least, you need general story treatments, and you proceed with them in mind, toward a predetermined destination. The Star Wars sequels didn't even manage to decide on its primary antagonist, and for the apologists who might strain to argue that this approach was a subversion of expectations, and that it delivered an unpredictable ensemble cast of villains, I call BS. Not your cookies, Ryan. Intention matters little when the result is a disjointed, chaotic mess. This doesn't make the films good or fresh. It makes them bad. The need to be different does not absolve a creator the responsibility of actually being good. Originality can be awesome, but you either rise to the occasion or leave it to someone who can. Because in terms of art, it's better to be formulaic and succeed than novel and suck. There's a very logical reason the Beatles, The Who, Led Zeppelin, and dozens of other rock groups got their start covering blues and blues standards. First, they learned their craft. Then, and only then, did they expand its boundaries. In response to the consideration of tight deadlines and aggressive expectations from Disney's shareholders as some kind of justification for insufficient planning, I'd simply counter by saying, considering Disney's vast resources, that there was more than enough time for planning and to secure the kind of talent needed to make something at least acceptably good. The evidence that there was more than enough time to get the Star Wars sequels right can be found in the ready-made examples of cinematic quality, long-form entertainment television programming particularly in recent years. The Sopranos, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, all come to mind. It's very easy for us to find hundreds of examples of shows or miniseries that have a singular narrative, and within just one season, manage to account for considerably longer stretches of airtime and storytelling than 3 above-average length movies. The 3 Star Wars sequel films combine for 7 hours and 11 minutes of story, according to math, while the first season of Game of Thrones nets nearly 9.5 hours of long-form, non-episodic storytelling. The point is, whether or not the sequel scripts were to be adaptations or original, there was time to generate a story capable of satisfying the breadth of a film trilogy. There are simply too many examples of these all over the TV streaming landscape to argue otherwise. And I'll leave this at that.
That's not fair. That's not fair at all. There was time now. There was all the time I needed. It's not fair.
The third and final of these unforgivable sins was the first on the previous list of general grievances, making it the alpha and omega of the sequel sins. All of the previous violations contributed to the retroactive redefining of the originals and finalized Disney's theft of Star Wars. In terms of movie history, it's kind of a big deal. The only way to undo this act of cinematic vandalism is for us to simply reject the sequels. In our mind, poof, they don't exist. Personally, I don't and won't watch anything that attempts to connect or establish any parts of the sequels, because to acknowledge them is to validate the destruction of the meaning of episodes 4 through 6. And Star Wars doesn't have the luxury to suck and retain the regard of diehard fans of the original. You simply cannot respect the original story and the sequels simultaneously, for all of the reasons listed earlier. You can enjoy them separately, I suppose, but even that's a task, one that's not worth my time or money. If Hollywood and Disney don't remove the sequels from canon, we simply remove it from the collective cultural canon, via indifference. And I think that's already started, because the sequels, unlike the originals, are unworthy of being preserved, either by the Library of Congress or the public. I'm a pretty big Velvet Underground fan, and a final album called Squeeze was released after the departure of its founding members. I've listened to it. It was meh, and was Velvet Underground in name only. It was kind of like the sequels to Star Wars, only not as bad. You can hear it on Spotify, but good luck trying to find a pressed copy. It simply went away because it wasn't good enough.
Moving on. Push, push, push.
But hey, it's a free empire, man. So you do you. But if it's defending the sequels, please lower your blinds and do so in private. Meanwhile, I'll be somewhere watching Luke and Company save the galaxy and defeating the Emperor, once and for all, the way George wrote it.
What if someone else beside you came to you and said, I want to make episode 7? Could you see that happening?
No.
No, absolutely, positively, you're really closing the door without any wiggle room whatsoever.
Right. There is no episode 7.
You're goddamn right.
Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Wait a second, sorry about that. That's someone else's cookies. I mean outro. And here's mine. Thanks for listening.